Hello, 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 and welcome to Cultivate Your Mental Wealth. As most of you know, my name is Joyce Ozeh, and I am a civil rights attorney here in Chicago, but I'm also a mental health advocate with lived experience. That means specifically that I've had experience with anxiety and depression, and yet I'm in a completely different space because of all of the things that we discuss on the show. Here on this show, our journey is to go from places of mental illness to places of mental wellness, and from mental wellness to mental abundance. What I mean by that is I strongly believe that we were called to live in the overflow. Wellness isn't just for us, it's also for our communities. So let's think about our wellness as wealth and abundance. I promise you, friends, it is so possible. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of what we're going to be talking about today, I like to go through an overview of today's show. First, as always, let's do some audience check-ins. Where are you watching from? Where are you tuning in from? I'm monitoring the comments, so please, please, please just let me know where you're tuning in from. And today's topic that we're discussing is going to be mental health and the church. I mean the big C capital church before any of y'all think I'm calling out specific churches, and specifically the Christian church. So we'll get into that overview. We also have a very special guest speaker, so stay tuned for that. We'll talk about what's to come in this series of mental health in the church. And finally, I'll leave you with some practical pushes so that you can execute some of the things that we discuss here today. Does that sound good? Great. So again, audience check-ins, please let me know where you're tuning in from. I love to hear from y'all. Also, what are your real life questions or struggles when it comes to mental health and the church? Maybe you've had a bad experience or you've had some church hurt. Let me know about your questions surrounding mental health as it relates to the Christian church or some of the struggles that you've gone through. We'll talk about what this space is meant for, but know that you are safe and that you can share with openness and transparency. And for those of you who are like, I still do not want to share, fear not. We have an email on Cultivate Your Mental Wealth, and that is comethrive247@gmail.com. That is comethrive247@gmail.com. You are able to ask me questions, consult with me for free. This is only an offer that I give my audience members, my family. Ask me questions about how to navigate all of these things, and I promise to personally follow up with you. In fact, the series on boundaries came about because someone messaged me asking questions, and I was able to consult with them. So I would love to hear from you, and I would love to thrive with you. Okay, so before we get into the main segment of our show, we're going to do what I love to call setting the room. And that's where we kind of lay the expectations and the groundwork for this space. So here in this space, this is our conversation. I may be talking at you. I may be speaking with a guest, but I want you to know first and foremost, this is our conversation. You are free to share. You are safe here. You are seen here. This is our space. Please share any comments that you feel comfortable with or follow up with me one-on-one. If I do not get to your comments in the show, I will personally follow up afterwards. Okay, friends, let's talk, let's thrive. So we've wrapped up our boundaries or our series on boundaries with friends and family and coworkers. Were some of y'all able to tune into that series in October? It was really, really productive. No fear if you weren't able to do that. We can still check it out on BDO's Facebook page and also the YouTube page. But this week is a new series on mental health and the church. So many feelings surrounding this topic. I personally wanted to address it because as a Christian, it's one that affected me personally. And as I mentioned, we actually have a guest speaker to help us navigate this two-part series. And before we let him on, I gotta read his accolades because they are long and worth announcing. Dr. Gregory Lan Ijuola will be with us today. He is a theologian and a pastor. He is also an international speaker, an author, an innovator, and a leadership and organizational systems consultant. He's a PhD holder in philosophy and organizational leadership. And what I like to say about what I call Pastor Lan, because he's also my pastor, is he just understands people. He understands people, cultures, and systems. So, with that, please give a virtual round of applause as we call him to this space. Welcome, welcome, Dr. Pastor Lan.
Thank you, Joyce. Great introduction to the show. Good.
Thank you. But more than anything, thank you so much for being here as we navigate. I think what is easy to avoid in this space, this conversation on mental health in the church. Before we go any further, you know I'm an attorney, so I have to make all of my disclaimers. This two-part series will not cover everything that needs to be discussed when it comes to mental health in the church. This is just going to be some of the most pertinent things that have been weighing on our hearts, some of the things that you and I, Pastor, have discussed. But don't let this be the end all or be all. Rather, let it whet your appetite or actually be an invitation for you to dig deeper into more difficult conversations. Wouldn't you say?
Yes.
That's just kind of where we're going to start.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the objective for today's conversation is we want to kind of understand the historical relationship between mental health and the church. We also want to identify some misconceptions, stigmas, and harmful practices. I also am going to be asking you some questions that people have asked me that I've avoided. So I hope you're ready.
Oh, well, I'm scared already.
Let the Holy Spirit be your guide. Peace like a river.
Okay. God will help me.
God needs to help both of us. So first and foremost, BDO's platform, or blackdoctor.org, is designed to educate all people, but it has a specific purpose on focusing on how to equip the Black community with tools that they need to access healthcare, info, and remedies. So a lot of our conversation is going to be talking about mental health and its effects on the Black community as it relates to church, but this is designed to educate all of us. But with that framework or backdrop, Pastor, let's look at how we can dig in further and look at this from a racial and culturally historical perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm Nigerian American, you're Nigerian. What are or how have traditional African spiritual beliefs and practices influenced the Black church's view of mental health? Can you speak to that?
Yes, we'll love to. Well, let me say thank you for having me on. Glad to be here, and I count it a privilege. And also wanted to say congratulations to you for doing this. This is a blessing. I'm talking about the series of shows that you've been doing, and really thank God for you, and I'm proud of you. Well done and good job, and thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
So, talking about the African traditional religious beliefs. Now, being Nigerian, I will probably go a little bit deeper talking about the traditional religious beliefs, because there are different religions, right? In Africa, there's the African traditional religion, right? We call it ATR. And then, of course, there's Christianity and Islam and all that came in there. And then there's a kind of syncretic operations of both right now, also that is also there. So let me start from the African traditional religion. It's a religion that believes very strongly in the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
So the supernatural. So it attributes basically everything that happens in this world to a supernatural origin. So even if something happens, maybe it's there's some scientific explanation to it or some physical explanation to it, there's a tendency to attribute it to some spiritual causes, right? And talking about this very important topic of mental health, I think one of the big things, looking to the history of religion, even the Christian church, is that many of the things that have to do with mental health have been wrongly attributed to supernatural origins. So when you want to treat them or you want to address them or mitigate them, they usually go first of all to the supernatural. Now, I'm a man, I believe in prayer.
Yeah.
I believe in the supernatural. But I also know that not every problem has a supernatural origin. There are physical issues, there are mental issues, there are different realms, of existence and body of knowledge, and they apply to different aspects of life. And I think in the area of mental health, one of the things that has happened regarding that in relation to the church or relation to the African traditional religion or influence is a lot of dependence on supernatural means to treat things that can be treated in other ways, therapy and so on. So I would say that, yeah.
I love what you're saying about treatment in other ways, because we're going to get to that as a misconception. So thank you for flagging that.
Mm-hmm.
And also thank you for kind of laying that framework, because it makes sense, right? As much as the transatlantic slave trade and colonization tried to separate us from our cultural roots,
Mm-hmm.
there are still that influence that survived when people came here as slaves in the States.
Mm-hmm.
And we see the ramifications or the effects here in the States in Black American culture and the Black American church as it relates to mental health, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm also thinking about how we can talk more about how the Black church historically has served as a sanctuary for people in terms of healing mental health. And you touched on that, over spiritualization.
Mm-hmm.
I'm almost afraid to say that because people might get like, oh no, everything is spiritual. Well, no, God created a physical world. We have
Yep.
physical bodies.
Mm-hmm.
We can still be a Christian and
Yep.
not attribute everything to the supernatural. And I think that is important to call out when we're talking about calling things as they are and
Yep.
healing.
You can't substitute eating for praying. Say, I'm not going to eat, I'm just going to pray. Or I'm not going to sleep anymore. All I'm just going to do is just keep worshiping God.
Exactly. I mean, that's all well and dandy, but your physical body has physical needs. That's
Exactly.
a really, really good comparison for those of you who may be feeling guilty or shame about treating physical needs, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But thank you for that context. So let's think of the Black church as a sanctuary for healing.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk more about why some Black people historically and maybe even presently still avoid treatment in lieu of going to church?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can I just to give a broader context, let me talk a little bit more about the mental health and the church as a whole, and then I will get into the Black church here in the United States, as we move on. So I started talking about the fact that generally the first way that mental health issues were treated by the church was generally from a supernatural standpoint. Anybody that has depression or anything, the person is a demon cast out of them. In fact, you read in the Bible, this guy was going through depression, Saul, and the way it was written, an evil spirit from the Lord came and troubled Saul. So everything was basically what people understood then was, if there was something going on, there was a spirit. So the beginning of the relationship between the church mental health started from that. We're going to deal with it. supernaturally. Then secondly, the other thing was there was a stigma attached to those things because secondly, it is attributed to maybe the person has committed some sin.
Yeah.
So if somebody's going through some maybe depression or something on the mental health spectrum, there's always that thing of either the parents sinned or the person sinned or did something. That's what is causing it. So people tend to hide it. People, kept away from religious bodies because it's either you're going to go to exorcism, right, or you are going to be excommunicated, depending on the severity of it. So that was the beginning. But I have to mention something before I move on because some tradition that came into the Black church came from this flow. Somewhere along the line, like around the 16th century, there was this guy called Vincent de Paul. He's actually the one that DePaul University in Chicago is named after. And many of, St. John's University in New York came out of what it started to, and several other hospitals. In fact, if you type Vincent de Paul, you see a lot of mental health thing. He was a priest who dedicated his life to being with the poor. And he was one of those people who began to talk about mental health because he was also a scientist. He began to talk about mental health, taking it out of the realm of the supernatural into the natural realm, that these are things that could be treated. And I'm so glad right now, somewhere like DePaul University, you have a lot of disciplines in there that deal with mental health and so on. But I just wanted to mention the origin of that. And from that was in 16th century, 15th something. That was when that kind of thought began to come into the church, that this is not just a supernatural thing. This is something that can be dealt with in other ways also, in addition to the supernatural things. And from that movement, right, several, different, that's where asylums came from. That's where, like, pastoral care and treatment of mental health in monasteries and all that came from that flow. And it is from that tradition that, churches becoming a sanctuary for people, like basically, especially going to the Black church. There was a time that the only institution that was a bit respected and sort of protected, where people could go to, was the church. And the clergyman was the most important person in the African American, African community. He was like the one everybody went to. And that's how the church became the center of everything. That's where talents were developed. That's where a lot of people go to, prayer and so on. And then contemporary times, we now see churches now beginning to partner with mental health institutions, establishing counseling services, and doing all that stuff. So that's just like a brief history of how we got to where we are right now. It's still not where it's supposed to be because the stigma is still there, but at least compared to where we used to be, it's a lot better.
And I want to flesh out some of those stigmas, but I actually did not know that about Vincent de Paul. But what I do know to be true is how central the church is to many community members, and especially the Black community. Also, that connection and that safety is, you trust your clergyman, you trust your pastor, you trust them in a way that you can't necessarily trust your doctor. A lot of systemic racism has kept Black people from seeking help. We have the Tuskegee experiments where Black men were tested on and not told they were being tested on and not being treated for syphilis. I encourage y'all to look into that. So this distrust of the healthcare system didn't come out of nowhere. But you're going to trust the people that you worship with. You're going to trust the people that lead you. And also, there's this vulnerability. Dr. Land is also my pastor. And there are things that I've shared with him that I have not shared with my mother, right? Because there is a safety there. And because this conversation can be so stigmatized, people feel more comfortable speaking openly and vulnerably with people in the church and especially their pastor. So it makes sense why that was the most natural and historically safe and even presently safe relationship. But again, going to stigmas, I want to jump ahead and just address some records straight. Like, let's just set the record straight. Is God against seeking mental health treatment as a Christian? Because some misconceptions, and maybe we should back up and talk about misconceptions.
Yes, that would be good.
The most pressing thing to me. But before we look at where God stands on this thing or our understanding of where he stands, what are some misconceptions that you've faced as a pastor, as a counselor, when it comes to mental health diagnosis and treatment as Christians?
Yeah. Yes. I actually, I took some time to think about this, and I was able to see some categories of misconceptions that generally have been there within the church and they're still there. The first one will be linking every suffering to sin. Like whenever somebody is going through something, including mental health challenges, what comes to mind is, oh, maybe this person has done something bad, and that's why this is happening to this person. And so people hide, right? People hide. They don't want to share because they're going to be judged. They're going to be judged that, oh, yeah, they don't have enough faith, or they've committed some personal sin or something, or they are operating under a particular curse. And that's why this is going on in their lives. That's a misconception. We live in a fallen world. I mean, even though everything can be traced back originally to sin, right? But it's not everything that people go through right now that you have to look from the standpoint of, oh, they've done something wrong. Why this is happening? We face challenges. We face health challenges, whether it's mental or physical. And then, of course, the next misconception is the one I talked about this, thinking that everything is supernatural, that the solution to everything is supernatural. But there are other domains that God uses in healing and dealing with issues. And then what about some statements, like some biblical statements that people misunderstand? So, for example, when Jesus said, take no thought for the future. So I have read in some places and even heard, an individual interpret that passage when he says, don't take no thought about anything. That means that whatever is going on in your life right now, you don't need to do anything about it, right? Just let it be. God is in charge. That's a kind of fatalistic thinking, right? Whatever is happening, and maybe God allowed it and it's going to be there. If God wants to take it away, he's going to take it away. So people take that and, well, this is my burden, this is my cross. I'm just going to have to bear it. But God, really, if you interpret scriptures well, you will know that there are definitely solutions to things. We can seek solutions, and God wants us to seek solutions, right? Other ones, things like, well, God will do it in his time, right? God will do it in his time. That stops people from actually addressing issues, and mental health issues have to be addressed. If we don't address them, they get worse. A stitch in time saves 9. So that kind of thinking of just leaving it out there and so on. And then the other one, test of faith. Oh, this is just my test of faith. This is just my burden. So things that encourage, passivity, things that always look to it as a supernatural thing or based on somebody's sin or faults and all that. Those are some of the issues that I have seen personally as a counselor, pastor, that people go through, that you have to walk through, with people. So there's not a lot of transparency there because people are afraid of being judged.
People are afraid of being judged. Yeah. It's stigmatized. When I was first diagnosed with generalized anxiety, my mother's greatest fear was that people would find out.
Yeah.
that I that I am experiencing this.
Mhm.
And the funny thing is, I was irritable for most of my life, not knowing that it was like anxiety I was wrestling with.
Mhm.
And once it was finally named as anxiety,
Mhm.
there was a relief
Mhm.
because you can't change or address what you don't name or confront.
Mhm.
You cannot change what you don't confront.
Yeah.
By avoiding it, silencing it, looking the other way, tempering it without confronting it, it
Mhm.
exacerbated it. I was
Yeah.
even more anxious, more irritable, more all of those things. I only found freedom in
Mm.
confronting it head on and speaking to those lies.
Yeah.
But also, I used to love like scary stories, spooky stories,
Mhm.
right? And I actually had someone tell me, you may be experiencing depression because you've opened up a portal into another world.
Okay. Well,
And
it's a
now,
possibility. Yeah.
I'm a spiritual person. I believe that the
Mhm.
devil is real. The
Yeah.
Bible says the devil
Yeah.
is convinced that he's not real, right?
Yeah.
But in that moment, I felt so much shame. Like, this is my fault.
Mm.
I'm experiencing depression because of something that I brought onto myself.
Mhm.
Or also this idea that, the people in your family tend towards depression, so you will always be this way. Like,
Mhm.
this is literally things that I'm calling out, y'all, that I've experienced myself. It's like, well, there's no cure for anxiety disorder
Yeah.
or depression, so you are always going to be this way.
Mhm.
And it gets to a point where anxiety and depression become personality traits. Like, well,
Mm.
if I'm always going to be this way, then I had better identify with this thing.
Yeah.
So those are just some misconceptions:
Yeah.
shame, fear,
Mhm.
blame,
Yeah.
avoidance
Mhm.
that I had to wrestle with
Mm.
in order to get to a place where healing was possible. But again, I didn't know that healing was possible, which is a
Yeah.
misconception. So again, back to the $1,000,000 question, Pastor Lan.
Mhm.
Is God against seeking mental health treatment as Christians?
No, God is not. God is not against it. God is for it, and I think in our next show we're actually going to go through a whole lot of biblical references where mental health issues were treated, in various ways. So God is not against it. Just like God is not against physical health, like treating yourself, going to a doctor and treating yourself if something is going on. God is not against mental health treatment. God is not against spiritual health treatment. In any domain or dimension of life, God wants us to be whole. It's expressly stated in His word. I wish above all things that you prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. That's 3 John verse 3. So God wants us to have holistic health. And listen, if I'm a father of 3, and if my child is sick, I'm looking for a way for the child to be healed. And if there's a legitimate way that does not cause any other problem that the child can be healed, I'll take it. I'll say that God also, as a father, wants his children, as a creator too, not just as a father, as a creator, right? He wants his creation to be whole. And he has provided various ways. All of them are like streams. I believe some issues can be dealt with from the spiritual standpoint. I believe that some issues can be dealt with from the mental standpoint. And I believe some issues can be dealt with from the physical standpoint. And all these streams of wisdom were all put there by God. God is the author of physics, chemistry, medicine, everything. All knowledge that exists came from Him. So, and they are all there so that it can all flow. And sometimes when we learn these physical things, for example, if you want to fly a plane, it's physical laws that fly planes. It's not prayers that fly plane. That fly plane is physical laws of physics that allow planes to fly. Right? We can support you with prayer if you're afraid and all that. But if if the physical laws are obeyed, planes fly and they land, right? So that's how it is in order. I see life that way. That sometimes I don't seek a spiritual solution to things. I just seek a physical solution. I've seen answers or mentors. So, oh no, I got to. Sometimes some chemical imbalances taking place, right? Personally, happened to me. I went through a fast, and of course, going through a fast, you come out of it, and one of the things that happens is that you have a lot of. I did not even know that you have a lot of mental temptations and issues and pressures that come on you, right? That's the solution. I came across a book by a psychologist who's also a Christian, and the person told me, told me, that's where I read books, like person is talking to me, right? Get into some other things, like music, talking about how some things happen to the brain when you start getting into music, getting into all that. And I began to do that. As I listened to more worship songs, as I learning to play the piano, and just getting into that, like over a couple of, weeks now that I've been playing the piano and learning, I find sometimes that's what I do before I go to bed. Today I've played piano for hours.
Wow.
I just found out that those things that I was dealing with, they would just leave I was getting healthier. Yeah. So it wasn't really a spiritual solution. It was seeking mental help, right? Somewhere. Yeah. So by the way, the book I had is called The Perfect You. Yeah. By Caroline Leaf. Yeah.
I knew that's who you're talking about. Dr. Leaf. She is one of my favorites. Yeah. But this is just the truth. And I want to underscore what you said, Pastor Lan. Any lie that tells you that by taking medication for the chemical imbalances in your brain that you're not being spiritual enough, that's a lie. Mm-hmm. That's a lie. Mm-hmm. God created all knowledge. God created doctors. Yeah. What if the solution you were praying for is in medicine? Yeah. That doesn't make you less spiritual. That doesn't make you less of a believer. That doesn't make you less of anything. Mm-hmm. So I really want to speak to that lie that God is against the treatment or medical health treatment or calling things by name. Mm-hmm. God is not. There are avenues and resources for you. We're going to share a little bit more. Mm-hmm. And before we go into some of our last things that we'll be talking about, Yolanda, I love what you've been saying. First of all, I see all y'all, Monica, Pastor David, Pastor Devo, Maya, Babas, my husband.
People are watching from different places. It's good, from many states.
Places. Yeah. But Yolanda, thank you so much for what you're saying about what the Black church needs practically to have sustainable communities, to support people in their mental health journey and how to provide resources. I encourage you and everyone else listening to stay tuned for part 2. I'll talk more about it towards the end, because in part 2 of this 2-part series, we talk about practical ways the church and the Black church can support community members when it comes to mental health discussions, support healing. So I'm going to take a closer look at your comments, but everything you're talking about, we are actually going to discuss in part 2. So thank you for flagging that in advance. Mm-hmm. Let's get to something else, though, about mental health and healing. Mm-hmm. So I attend the City Light Church in Chicago. It is a fantastic church, and it was the first time that I heard that I don't have to be who I've always been. I don't have to live under the cloud of anxiety and depression my whole life. Mm-hmm. And medication really didn't work for me. What did work for me was cognitive behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. And speaking the truth out loud, which is kind of part of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and changing the pathways in your brain to think new thoughts and make new links. Yes. That is science. Yeah. It also happens to be mental. It also happens to be spiritual. Yes. So that's just an example. And I remember going through this practice for months where I was seeing a therapist, a culturally competent therapist, someone who understood my background and where I was coming from. I was going to church. I was trying new things, discovering new things. And then there was a day where I did not feel the anxiety that I had felt for literally decades of my life. I did not have the same depressive thoughts that I had had for decades of my life. And it was fantastic. And I went and told everyone, I'm healed, I'm free. The old me, I was writing poetry. Pastor Land, you know that period.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then there was a time where I started to feel anxious, and I started to get depressed. And I think this was more concretely linked to a season as opposed to generalized anxiety, but I was still feeling those feelings.
Yeah.
And I ran to you lamenting, like, did the healing not stick? Like, did I not do it right? So my question to you, again, that we talked about before, is it possible to pray and still need other forms of treatment? We know that. But is it possible to experience bouts of depression and anxiety even when you feel like you've been freed from depression and anxiety?
Yeah.
Let's get into that a little bit.
Oh, yes. I mean, many of these things happen in cycles. I mean, think of Jesus Christ after the temptation, after he fasted the temptation. He said the devil left him for some time, looking for an opportune time again. So meaning that when we overcome stuff in our lives, we have to maintain it. Meaning that there's a tendency for it to come back. Jesus even said it this way, that now this is talking about evil spirit in this case, right? He said if an evil spirit leaves a person, it goes about seeking for a dry place and whatever. If it doesn't find one, it comes back to its former house. And if it finds it empty, and there's a key word there, I'm going to talk about that empty. Say if it finds it empty, then it will come back again and bring 7 more spirits. So the ending state of that person is actually worse than the first. So Jesus was talking about that there, and we have other examples there. Whatever we have been delivered from, we have to stay delivered from. And the key word there is emptiness. Nature abhors a vacuum. That's a statement in physics. So nature abhors a vacuum. You can't find a vacuum in nature. Nature will fill it up with something. So when we get freed, right, we have to engage in certain things that keep us filled, either mentally, just like what you talked about, making sure that neural pathways created continue to become strong.
Yeah.
Spiritually remaining strong. A lot of things have to do with words. A lot of things have to do with community. When you start talking about mental health, and we're going to talk about that later, words, thinking, sometimes even talking to a therapist, it's just catharsis. You just need some things out of yourself. And there are many other ways you can do that. You can write it on a piece of paper. You can do all kinds of things to get to that state, right? But all of these things are things that we have to make a continual part of our life, or we'll go back into the cycle. And it can actually be worse than at first. So that's why, if we're facing, we have mental health. And I believe everybody has some kind of mental health issue, or the other. Everybody has one, right? It's just, I love Caroline Leaf. She put it on a spectrum. And she talked about the fact that basically there are 2 fundamental things. There's love and fear. Now, love is where all the good one and all the mental wellness comes from. But fear is where every other thing comes from. And when fear grows and grows over time, it becomes all kinds of things. And since all of us deal with some kind of fear or the other, we all need this. And that's why the Bible speaks very practically about it. So encourage everybody that, first of all, seek help and stay, in that place of vigilance, stay in that place of doing what got you relief, so that, you don't have it relapse. Yeah.
Exactly. I really appreciate that. Nature abhors or hates a vacuum.
Yeah.
So the most natural flow of your life, your body, literally nature itself, is to fill up a space that's empty. This is
Yeah.
something that Michael tells me, my husband, all the time, as a science guy.
Your husband is a wise guy, you know. It's like
It's because you married a wise woman, so he can't help but be wise. But again, yes, antidepressants in the Black community have gotten a bad rap. I'm turning to some of the comments. That is so true. I also love what someone said about focusing on the love and the grace of God. We're talking about vacuums.
yeah,
Let that fill you up
yeah,
when you can't be filled with the things that you've tried to fill yourself up with. That is a surefire way to help turn your mental health around. I also want to talk about the fact that let therapy, medication, counseling, prayer run its course. I was speaking out loud for months and months and months and months before I can even notice a difference.
yeah.
So,
It takes a while.
yeah, another misconception about healing in the
Mhm.
church is that it has to be immediate.
Instant, yeah.
That isn't necessarily true. And it's
Mhm.
okay if that's not true.
Yeah. Thank God for instant healing.
Yeah.
Thank God for it. But what we've also discovered is that even those who experience instant healing, if they don't know the process of maintaining it, they also experience instant relapse.
Yeah.
So, but learning the process, because these are mental, emotional, there's stuff going on in our brain. And of course, you know, there's the debates in the psychology world.
Yeah.
You know, those who are materialists, they think everything takes place in the brain, which a lot of good psychologists disagree with, right? Because they've discovered people whose brains are actually, their brains have actually experienced injuries, but there was something else that was going on and they've been able to overcome it. So that's why they separate the mind from the brain.
Oh, wow.
So the mind is like, you know, the what causes the brain to work. It expresses itself physically in the brain. So if somebody has some issues going on in their brain, there's another part of them, the mind, that can actually heal that can actually, you know, cause them to overcome such adversity. So, and I'm so glad that Caroline Leaf and a whole lot of people believe that and they have a scientific proof of it, but they're materialists, you know, we just believe that everything is taken on, you know, but they can't explain why consciousness is there, why somebody who's lost, you know, like some part of their brains, right, can still, you know, neuroplasticity and all this stuff. So I'm so glad about that. And you know what I was, you know, about to say on that, you know, on that is that we need to watch that and make sure that whatever we, you know, whatever process that we used in getting freedom, we stay in that process. Like exercise, right? If you exercise and you have some, you build up some muscles and all that, you stop doing it and you just start eating and doing anything. Before you know it, you start seeing all the, you know, things you don't want to see any longer. So that's just one of the things about life. Life has to be maintained, whichever domain of life. Spiritual life has to be maintained, mental life has to be maintained. I say it this way, just think of life like this. I'll stop with that. Think of life like this, like the garden in your house, the garden in your house or your yard. You do nothing about it, weeds will be all over it. You will always have to either mow the grass in summer, rake the leaves in winter, in fall, or clear the snow in winter.
Yeah.
Every season, you have to do something
And maintenance is okay. It doesn't mean you're not thriving.
that you're not
So I
trying.
really, really appreciate those considerations. Again, I appreciate all of the comments we both do. Thank you for joining the discussion. I want to talk about what they can expect from us next time in 2 weeks, November 21st. We are going to get into more of hope, practical ways that the church can address this thing about mental health head on, how we can support communities, and how we can explore biblical evidence that talks about mental health issues, how people overcame, and how healing is possible.
Yeah.
I would like to give a virtual round of applause to Dr. Pastor Lan.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your insights. It's been so much fun speaking with you, and I cannot wait to see you in 2 weeks.
Same here.
I also want to get to my favorite segment of the show, and that is what we call practical pushes, where we talk practically about what we can do to apply what we've discussed today. So stay tuned right now for practical pushes. Again, friends, thank you so much for joining the discussion. To get into some practical pushes, I really want you all to think about community dialogue. Shame, hiding, avoidance doesn't serve anyone. So release yourself from the shame that was either put on you or that you internalized or created for yourself. God is about healing, God is about treatment, and you don't have to be who you've always been. I also encourage you to initiate open discussions and dialogue with your church and community members about the historical treatment of mental health in the church and how things can be shifted for the better. Call out misconceptions, but I encourage you to do that calling out in love. I love what Dr. King says about power and love, but I'm going to flip it to truth and love. So, truth without love is just reckless and abusive, but love without truth is sentimental and anemic. It doesn't do anything. So when we're calling things out, make sure that we do it in love, but make sure that we're speaking the truth because healing is possible. You deserve it. Our community deserve it. And I want you all to stay tuned and go thrive. Thank you for joining the conversation. Thank you again, Dr. Lan.
Thank you, Joyce.
Until next time.
Yeah, look forward to the next episode. 2 weeks time.